There is something strange about the moment you clicked on this video, not because of the title and not because the algorithm pushed it to you. It is as if a signal had been traveling through layers of static, moving across months, maybe even years, just to reach you at this exact second. An encounter that was never scheduled yet uncannily precise in the way Machiavelli understood the world. No coincidence is truly accidental. Some moments do not come from logic, but from the depths of the unconscious. And this may very well be one of them. The strange thing is this message only needs to find you once, because the nature of inner transformation is that it always happens in silence at the right time and never repeats itself. Once you step through that threshold, you no longer belong to the old space. So if you are here, if you stopped instead of scrolling past, it means something in you is already ready to look straight at yourself, prepared to face the deepest part of you that has been whispering to be recognized. And this is only the beginning, because right after these lines, what you are about to hear is not just words. It is the mirror the unconscious has been waiting a very long time to place in your hands. And if you want to turn this moment into a small milestone, you can write just 4 words in the comments. I accept the challenge as a silent commitment to your inner journey. Number 1, Machiavelli's mechanism of transformation. There is a truth Machiavelli never stopped emphasizing, though most of us only vaguely understand it. Inner transformation does not happen because you want it to. It occurs when something inside you is touched in a quiet, irreversible way. There is no loud explosion, no glorious moment. Only a subtle shift so delicate that if you are not paying attention, you will think nothing has happened. But from that moment on, you are no longer the person you were the day before. Machiavelli called this the process of awakening the unconscious, where a piece of content that has long been hidden suddenly rises to the surface and confronts you as if it had been waiting far too long to be seen. It does not ask permission, does not consult you, and does not wait for you to be ready. It appears only when its natural time has come, and when it comes, you are forced to change the way you see the world. Sometimes a transformation begins with things so small you would never guess. A sentence you overhear in a cafe, a stranger's gaze that leaves you inexplicably unsettled, a seemingly ordinary situation that makes you go silent for a few seconds. These moments are like the unconscious knocking on your door. When you open it, even if only a crack, you have no idea that an entirely new space is waiting on the other side. In Machiavellian psychology, we live like overlapping circles. One circle is the conscious ego, where you know who you are, what you think, and what you want. The other circles are the vast unconscious, holding darkness, wounds, repressed memories, instincts, intuition, archetypes, and even truths you have never dared to touch. When real transformation happens, it is when a deeper circle collides with the surface circle and shakes the entire structure you have been living in. You do not choose this, you only feel the impact. What is frightening is that this transformation does not take on a predictable form. It is not the kind of change modern people like to talk about, like starting a new habit or changing your mindset. Transformation in Machiavelli's sense is a shift in inner structure. Not changing behavior first, but changing the essence that forces behavior to change accordingly. It is like turning a compass just a few degrees in the dark, and the next morning you are surprised to find yourself walking in a direction you had never considered before. Think back to a recent moment. Maybe you were listening to someone talk about living true to yourself, a theme so familiar that you have heard it hundreds of times, but then on some random day you hear that same sentence. Yet this time it hits you in a way that makes you freeze for a few seconds. You just feel your heart go still, and in that moment what was familiar suddenly becomes real. It is not new information, it is activation. As if your unconscious had been waiting for that exact day, at that exact version of you to flip the switch. Transformation happens like that, a very small click with an effect that stretches across years. The key lies in the depth. People tend to think change means trying harder, being more disciplined, and pushing themselves more. But Machiavelli pointed out that every surface-level change will always fail if the deeper layer underneath does not move. You can try to live positively, but if deep down you still believe you are not worthy, every effort will only be a coat of paint over a cracked wall. You can promise to let someone go, but if your shadow still binds you with the fear of being alone, you will go back to them by sheer inertia. True transformation is when you look directly at the reason you are stuck, when you stop avoiding it, when you allow the light to shine on the exact place that hurts the most, and that always begins with a very small moment, very quiet, but very important. The mechanism of transformation in Machiavelli's view is not magic. It is an internal reorganization. A layer of the unconscious is brought into the light. A part of the shadow is called by its name. A forgotten fragment of the soul is brought home, and each time that happens, the inner structure of your being changes. You become a new version of yourself without having to try to become a new person. Someone once said they completely changed their life because of one evening standing in front of the mirror, looking at themselves and feeling, "I don't recognize this person anymore." It was just a sudden clarity, and that clarity pulled them out of their old life, as if they had just stepped into a new room in the house of their soul. That is the mechanism of transformation. Machiavelli wanted us to understand. A natural force, quiet yet powerful. A single moment of illumination, but heavy with weight. One single touch, but enough to alter the entire direction of your life. Number 2, the moments that only come once in a lifetime. And when transformation enters your life in such a quiet way, it always leads you to another truth. Machiavelli emphasized some moments come only once in your life, a single time, a time that does not repeat, cannot be rewound, cannot be recreated in any form. If the moment of transformation is the first touch, then those once-in-a-lifetime moments are the doors that open and then immediately close, leaving you standing on the other side without fully understanding what just happened. Yet, it is precisely these moments that mark the true maturation of the soul. From Machiavelli's perspective, these special moments occur when the content of the unconscious and the circumstances of the outer world align perfectly, like two long-lost pieces of a puzzle finally clicking together. He called this a meaningful coincidence, synchronicity. It is not a miracle, but a moment when you and the world speak the same language for a few brief seconds. And when that language sounds, it awakens something you had never named. Someone once shared that he met an anonymous old man during a bus ride at sunset. They talked for just 10 minutes. The old man told him, "Do not live the life other people think is right. Life is shorter than you think." He never asked the man's name, never saw him again. But 3 months later, he handed in his resignation, leaving a job he had stayed in for 8 years just to satisfy his family. He said he did not remember the old man's face, but remembered exactly the tone of his voice that day, a single moment, yet it altered the trajectory of an entire life. What makes these moments sacred is not their surprise, but their impossibility of repetition. You can try to find the person who said the words that woke you up. You can retrace the road you walked that day, the chair you sat on, the sunlight of that afternoon, but it is useless. That point in time is gone, and the psychological space you were in that day no longer exists. This makes those one-time moments precious because they do not come to be kept. They come to be absorbed. These special moments often appear in very simple forms. A rainy afternoon that makes you think of someone no longer in your life. An old song that suddenly plays and makes you realize you have forgiven a person you thought you would hate forever. a very short text message from someone who makes your chest feel lighter. These seemingly small things are actually the heartbeats of the unconscious. Each beat only sounds once. Many people do not realize how important such moments are because they are waiting for a big sign, but the unconscious does not operate with thunder, it works with subtlety. Machiavelli said that small moments are what shape psychological life. Just like how a road that is off by a few cm at the starting point can lead you to a different continent at the end, a quiet moment of awakening can change the entire direction of your life without any announcement. A once-in-a-lifetime moment is often not recognized while it is happening. You only realize you passed through it when you look back, when you realize that was the day everything changed. This makes them a special kind of milestone. You only see their value after you have already stepped into a new version of yourself, a version that no longer fits the old questions, and so these moments never return, not because they are lost, but because you are no longer the person who could receive them the way you did. Just as you cannot return to the moment you first learned to ride a bicycle, that moment finished its task and disappeared, but the change it brought lives on inside you. What makes these moments unique is the intersection between two currents, the outer life and your inner movement. When the two align, you have a once-in-a-lifetime moment. When they do not, no matter if someone says the same sentence, you watch the same video, or the circumstances look identical, nothing in you moves. And this is the truth Machiavelli wanted us to understand. The moments that only come once are the language the unconscious uses to speak to you. They are signals sent at the exact time, at the right depth, to the precise layer you need to step through. Not earlier, not later. If they come too early, you will miss them. If they come too late, you will have closed yourself off. But when they arrive at the right moment, they open a path you cannot turn your back on anymore. Number 3, the human fear of things that only appear once. Moments that only come once in a lifetime do not just have the power to lead you into a new version of yourself. They also leave behind a particular kind of fear. The fear that you have lost something that will never return. Machiavelli once said that much of human insecurity comes from our tendency to cling to what has already completed its course. When a perfect moment ends, instead of letting it dissolve into us as a lesson, we keep running after it as if something were still missing, and when we realize it cannot come back, fear rushes in like a cold wave. We are afraid of things that only appear once because we are used to repetition. The mind feels safer when everything has rhythm, structure, and predictability. A thing that happens only once shatters that entire sense of security. It is like walking down a familiar road and suddenly seeing a flash of light appear and disappear into the forest. You know you saw it, you feel its meaning, but you cannot call it back to make sure it really existed. The unconscious sends a signal once, then falls quiet, and it is precisely that silence that confuses the ego. Machiavelli saw this as the ego's reaction when confronted with material that is too deep. The ego always wants control, wants proof, wants one more time to be certain it was not mistaken, but the unconscious operates oppositely. Once a message has been sent and received, it no longer needs to repeat itself. The fact that it appears only once is the sign of its completeness, yet the ego interprets completeness as loss. We fear what comes only once because it forces us to grow up instantly. There is no preparation time, no promises, no transition phase. Like meeting a person who suddenly makes you see the truth about yourself, you do not want them to disappear, not because they are so important in themselves, but because they are the mirror reflecting what you never dared to face. When the mirror is gone, you fear you will not have the courage to hold on to that truth. In psychology, there is a concept called the emotional anchoring effect. Humans tend to attach themselves to strong emotional sources, especially uplifting or awakening experiences. When a moment opens up a new layer of awareness, it creates an inner shock, and naturally we want to freeze it to go back and make sure it was not just a passing feeling. But here lies the paradox. The stronger the moment, the less it repeats because its very impact turns you into a different person. A once-in-a-lifetime moment only fits the version of you that existed then. Once that version fades, the moment no longer fits. It is like trying to return to a sunset so beautiful it left you breathless. You go back to the same place the next day or a week later. The sun still sets, the sky still changes color, but the feeling is gone. Not because the sunset is any less beautiful, but because you are no longer the person who saw it that first time. If right now a once-in-a-lifetime moment has just resurfaced in you, one that you have never really named, let it breathe a little in the comments below. You do not need to tell the whole story. Just a single line is enough for you to acknowledge to yourself you are ready to move on. Many people fall into the loop of trying to recreate once-in-a-lifetime moments because they believe repetition will strengthen the feeling. But in truth, the very fact that it does not repeat is the proof that it has finished its task. If it shows up again, it means you have not fully understood, not integrated, not truly changed. Repetition in the spiritual realm is often a sign of being stuck, not of evolution. Notice the relationships you tried to return to, only to realize the feeling was no longer the same, not because the other person changed, but because you had moved to a different level. Or a book that once brought you to tears, but now when you read it again, you feel nothing. Not because it has become less good, but because you have already walked past the lesson it carried. And Machiavelli always reminded you that fear is completely natural. It is simply the echo of the part of you that has not yet caught up with your new level of growth. What you think is gone is in fact being transferred inward, becoming a part of you. So when you feel unsettled in front of something that only appears once, remember it has not abandoned you. It came to give you exactly what it was meant to give, then left so you would have space to grow. What is truly frightening is not that the moment disappears, but that you refuse to move forward after it has already opened the way for you. Number 4, the conditions for a message to find you. And it is precisely this fear of things that only appear once that leads us to a more important question. If transformative moments cannot be repeated, what determines when they arrive? Why is it that sometimes a message pierces straight into your heart like an arrow, yet at other times, even if you hear the same thing, it passes by like a gust of wind? Why are there days when a single sentence is enough to change the direction of your life, and other days when 100 pieces of advice cannot move you at all? This is where Machiavelli offers an answer that is both simple and profound. A message does not find you based on willpower, but based on how open your consciousness is at that exact moment. According to Machiavelli, human consciousness is never static. It contracts and expands in invisible cycles like the breathing of the soul. When consciousness contracts, you live within the fortress of the ego, where everything is understood in familiar ways. But when consciousness opens, signals from the unconscious begin to filter through. And if a message appears right when that door is slightly ajar, it will pierce through your outer defenses and hit the deepest part of you. The condition for a message to find you is not that you seek it, but that you enter a state of inner readiness. It is a moment when the rigid blocks inside you begin to soften, a time when the surface of your life may look unchanged, but your inner world has just cracked slightly in a new direction. That crack creates an opening just wide enough for the light to enter, and only then does the message become meaningful. Imagine reading a book at a time when you are not hurt, not conflicted, not weighed down by any questions. You might think it is good, but it passes through you lightly. Yet if you read the same book while you are in crisis, feeling lost, standing at the threshold of change, certain lines suddenly become a lifeline. The words themselves have not changed, you have. And that change is what makes the message suddenly sharp, precise, and aligned with the exact depth you are touching. This phenomenon is called selective perception. The brain does not take in everything, only what matches the internal state at that moment. Like when you are thinking of buying a white car and suddenly you see white cars everywhere. The world has not changed, your filter has. For Machiavelli, the conditions for a message to find you work similarly, but at a deeper level. It is not that you simply want to listen, it is that your unconscious wants to speak. When a layer of content in the unconscious is about to rise, the external world will provide a signal to trigger it. That may be someone's words, a song, a line you scroll past, or this very video you are watching. It does not appear by chance. It appears because your inner state has reached the point of convergence. The condition for a message to find you is like two frequencies syncing. A message can circle your life for years, but you only really hear it when you are broadcasting on the same frequency it is on. And when the two match, the volume does not need to be high. A single note is enough to move you. Machiavelli believed that each soul has its own timing for receiving certain lessons. Some lessons come when you are very young. Some come only after you have gone through many wounds, some arrive in your calmest moments, and some appear right when you think you have completely collapsed. You do not choose that timing, it is chosen by your individuation process. The journey of becoming the person you were born to be. The truth is, a message does not need you to hunt for it. It only needs you to be quiet enough to hear the call within, like the waves of the sea that are always there, but you only hear them when the waters inside you grow still. So what are the real conditions for a message to reach you? It is the moment when the fortress of the ego trembles just a little, when you are tired enough to stop pretending to be strong, when you are honest enough to look at what you have been avoiding. In those seemingly weak moments, the unconscious extends its hand, and if at that exact time the world sends you a message, you do not just hear it, you absorb it. A message finds you when you are in the state Machiavelli called the potential for transformation. A fragile balance point between collapse and awakening, when you are no longer clinging to the old, but have not yet arrived at the new, when you are standing at a threshold without knowing where you are about to step. At that place, any sentence, image, or moment that touches you can become the spark that ignites a new chapter. Thank you for walking with me through half of this journey. If these last lines made your heart pause for even a beat, then stay until the end, because what comes next may be the missing piece your unconscious has been trying to send you. And if you want to give the algorithm a small signal that you did not just stumble here by accident, leave a small sign with a like or a subscribe, not to support the channel, but to mark for yourself that you are ready to fully receive the message life is bringing you. Number 5. Stepping through the threshold. And whether you step through or not is the decisive moment that determines whether the message becomes a living truth within you, or remains just a brief flash passing through your mind. The interesting thing is that the threshold never looks like a grand opportunity. It does not arrive with drums or stage lights. Instead, it usually appears as a vague, hard-to-describe feeling, a weariness you cannot explain, a small intuition that you cannot keep living the way you have, or a gentle urge to pause for a moment and look into yourself. That is the first sign that you are standing before a threshold. Stepping through the threshold is not as forceful an act as people often imagine. In reality, it begins with a softening. When the ego is no longer rigidly resisting, when you stop trying to control or cling to familiar feelings, you open a space for transformation to occur, and stepping through the threshold is the first act of letting go. Letting go of the old, of the way you used to think about yourself, of the way you used to fight against what you feared to face. According to Machiavelli, there is a moment called the liminal moment. A moment when a person no longer belongs to the starting point, but has not yet arrived at the destination. It is like standing between two rooms. The door behind you has closed, but the door in front is still unclear. When you stand in this liminal zone, the ego feels lost, empty, and out of control. But to Machiavelli, this is the sacred space of rebirth. Only in this in-between can the old structures dissolve so that new ones can be born. Think back to the last time you stood before a decision you knew would change your entire life. It might have been leaving a relationship that had gone on for too long, changing a job everyone thought you would never quit, or simply speaking a truth you had hidden in your heart for many years. Before that moment, you always felt yourself being pulled back toward the old, but right after you spoke, acted, or accepted something you felt inexplicably lighter. That is the moment you stepped through the threshold. A familiar example: someone stays in a painful relationship for many years. Friends tell them, family advises them, and they themselves know they have to leave, but they do not because they do not understand, but because they have not yet stood at the threshold. Until one day, without a fight, without a shock, there is only a quiet moment. They look at the other person and recognize a truth: I am no longer here. And they leave, not because a new piece of advice appeared, but because the threshold had finally opened. When you step through the threshold, the first thing you may feel is not happiness but emptiness. Machiavelli believed this emptiness is precisely the space where the old ego dissolves. It is like taking off a skin that has become too tight. The initial feeling is not liberation but strangeness, unfamiliarity, a slight chill. Yet it is this very unfamiliarity that is the proof you have entered new ground. In the process of individuation, the journey back to your true self, the threshold appears many times. And each time it opens, you are forced to confront a deeper truth about who you are. But only when you agree to step through does the message that found you truly become a part of you. If you stop at the threshold, the message remains just knowledge. If you step through, it becomes life, and then something strange happens. The moment you enter this new world, the old world loses the power it once held over you. Fear no longer controls you. Attachment no longer binds you. The old questions no longer haunt you. It is as if an old door quietly disappears behind you, silent and absolute, and from here on, the only thing that remains is this: how will you live in the land you have just stepped into? If there is a door in your life that you once hesitated to step through, leave a small sign below. It could be a number, a symbol, or a short sharing. These marks will remind you that you have seen that threshold. Number 6. The loop of searching. Once you have stepped through a threshold, your inner life begins to change in ways that are hard to describe in words. But there is a paradox that most of us fall into right afterward. Instead of letting the change unfold naturally, we unconsciously slip back into a state of searching. We keep looking for more answers, more signs, more confirmation, as if the touch we just received were not strong enough to trust. And so the loop of searching begins to form, a loop that makes you run in circles around outer messages and forget that the most important shift has already happened inside. The loop of searching is one of the biggest temptations of this era. We live in a world where every question has countless answers, every problem has thousands of pieces of advice, and every inner emptiness has some piece of content ready to fill it. You only have to scroll for a moment and a whole universe of meaning opens before you. But precisely because there is so much, the mind is pulled into an unconscious behavior, looking for more, then more and more again. Machiavelli said that the ego tends to accumulate knowledge to avoid facing the inner truth. It prefers knowing to becoming. It prefers accumulation to transformation. And so the loop of searching is not about you lacking information, but about you trying to use information to avoid the silence required for true transformation. Think back to the days you felt lost. You watched this video, read that article, and listened to another podcast. At first, you felt relieved, as if someone was speaking on behalf of the part of you that could not find the words. But that relief did not last. You started to need more information, more content, more reassurance to hold yourself together. And this endless searching creates a sad truth. You no longer listen to understand. You listen to soothe yourself, like drinking seawater when you are thirsty. The more you drink, the thirstier you become. Machiavelli saw this loop long ago. He believed that modern people tend to chase outer light to avoid looking at their inner darkness. Because looking into the darkness is always harder than hearing another comforting piece of advice. Touching the real wound is always more painful than reading another healing page. And facing yourself is always harder than pressing play on the next video. The loop of searching operates like a maze. The more you run, the more you believe you are nearing the exit. But in reality, you are only going deeper into a mental panic. Machiavelli, however, affirmed that inner growth only happens when you are willing to stop, because the unconscious cannot speak to a mind that is running. It only begins to speak when you are quiet enough to listen. Machiavelli said there is no coming to consciousness without pain. The loop of searching ends not when you know enough, but when you dare to live according to what you already know. When you stop collecting and start practicing. When you stop listening outward and begin listening inward, when you stop looking for signs outside and start reading the signs within, and something is interesting, the loop of searching becomes strongest right after you receive the most important message. Why? Because that message forces you to change, and the ego fears change more than it fears ignorance. It will pull you back by making you think you are not ready yet, do not fully understand, still need more. That is how the ego delays transformation. It does not stop you from learning. It simply makes you learn so much that you never act. But there is one point on which Machiavelli and many other depth psychologists agree. Once the true message has really touched you, the loop of searching begins to lose energy. External accumulation no longer satisfies you. You feel tired at the thought of having to listen to more. You feel as if every piece of advice is starting to sound the same. That is not a sign of boredom. It is a sign of completion. Number 7, the ritual of closing the loop. When the search loop has drained its final bit of energy and you begin to realize that no further advice can give you what you are looking for, that is when you enter the most important stage, the ritual of closing the loop. Machiavelli believed that every true transformation requires a symbolic act, not because the act itself is mystical, but because the human psyche cannot integrate a lesson until it has been sealed with a clear mark. Just as you cannot leave a room while the door is still open, you must close it so you can step into the new space with full integrity. Closing the loop is not abandonment nor denial. It is the ritual acknowledgement that what you needed has been given. The lesson has been completed and you are ready to carry it into your life. The first ritual Machiavelli often mentioned is the act of naming the experience. When you write it down, speak it aloud, or silently acknowledge a truth within yourself. You bring unconscious content into the light. This naturally closes the loop because the unconscious cannot integrate anything still left in a blurred, undefined form. When you articulate it, you give it shape. And once it has shape, it knows where it belongs inside you. Try writing one simple sentence, "I have heard this enough." You may feel an unexpected lightness, not because the sentence is powerful, but because you just signaled to your mind that the search process is complete. The next ritual is empowering your intuition. A loop only continues when you do not trust what you already know, when you believe others understand you better than you understand yourself, when you believe the answer lies outside rather than within. But when you return to listening to your intuition, you reclaim the inner authority that the loop once stole from you. Machiavelli called this the act of returning to the center. To practice this, all you need is 2 minutes of stillness. Place your hand over your chest or your belly and ask yourself right now, what do I truly know? The answer might be a feeling, a direction, a single word that appears in your mind, but the moment you ask yourself, the loop loses its control. The next ritual is affirmation through commitment. This does not require heavy promises, only a short, clear, concise sentence that has the energy of an ending, like the final punctuation of a story. I am ready to move on. I choose to go forward. These sentences are not meant to convince others. They serve as psychological markers that help the unconscious understand that a chapter has been closed. This is more important than you might imagine because the unconscious operates through symbols, images, and language. A single sentence can be the key that opens the final door of transformation. The last ritual, and the deepest, is embracing silence. After the loop is closed, the first thing you will notice is an inner space that feels empty. No more fear urging you forward, no more impulse to search, no more noise from unanswered questions, but in truth, silence is the sign that the loop is completely closed, because when your inner world becomes clear, you no longer need noise to soothe yourself. Machiavelli called this the silence of integration. It is the most essential moment because it is in that silence that you begin to feel who you are becoming. You simply exist, and this simple being is the state of inner maturity. A small ritual you can practice to honor this silence is to pause for 1 minute before doing anything next. Just 1 minute, close your eyes, breathe deeply and feel I am standing in my new version. The moment you do this, the old lesson merges into you. The loop closes and you step into the next chapter of your journey with fullness. The ritual of closing the loop is not the end of the road. It is the doorway into another form of living. One in which you are no longer pulled by fear, no longer chasing signals from the outside, no longer scrambling for answers that have long been within you. This ritual helps you become the one steering your own ship. Not because you know everything, but because you no longer avoid what you already know. When a loop is closed through ritual, it never returns in its old form. It does not repeat to test you. It does not come back to challenge you. Its task is done. What remains is the path you choose to build, the steps you choose to take, and the version of yourself you are becoming. Whole, sufficient, no longer turning back for old validations. If you have made it this far, perhaps the most important thing is no longer in what you have just heard, but in what is quietly shifting within you. These words, they are only the pretext. The real event is the meeting between you and yourself, between the part you show the world and the part you keep in the dark. Machiavelli never asked, "How much have you understood?" He asked, after all this, "Can you keep living the same way as before?" There may be no immediate answer. Tomorrow you might wake up, go to work, talk, laugh, behave exactly as usual, but somewhere subtly something has shifted by a few degrees, and those few degrees will decide who you meet, what you leave behind, and who you slowly become. This video has done its part. It has found you and placed a mirror in your hands. The rest no longer belongs to it. It belongs to the small, quiet choices you will make from today onward in silence when no one else is reminding you to change.